Okay, so hello and welcome. This again is Blending Coffee East Africa. Thank you all. Thank you to our esteemed panelists for joining me today and discuss our favorite topic, which of course is East African coffee. And today I also want to thank all of our guests for showing up on time and logging in and keeping your mics on mute. Follow instructions very well. I appreciate that. And so today, first I wanted to let everyone know that I'm hosting out of Miami, Florida, and there's a hurricane happening right now. So if I cut out, that's why. All right, you can keep talking without me. It's cool. It's totally cool. But that's what's going on over here. Okay. So now the first thing I wanted to do is to sort of define the region that we'll be speaking about today, which is East Africa. And we're talking really about Congo, Burundi, Uganda, Rwanda, and Tanzania, which is more Central East Africa, but these countries often get kind of brought together, as specifically as a growing region. And these are the countries that we're really going to focus on today. Ethiopia and Kenya are kind of their own thing. And we really want to address this kind of lumping together in the conversation. We have 5 unique countries with a variety of flavor profiles and growing conditions and nuances. And yet many people still think that they're just kind of, if you have one, then you don't really need to buy another one. So if you're already getting something from Burundi, you don't need something from the Congo, or you don't need something from Uganda. But that's kind of like saying that if you already have something from Guatemala, you don't need anything from Costa Rica, which they're obviously, it's not true. And there's big differences between them. So now before we get into all that, I'd like to introduce our panelists and then have them talk a minute and just tell us a little bit about themselves and what they do. Again, I am Jake Leonti. I'll be your host today. And over the last 20 years, I've been working in coffee as a barista, roaster, green grader, and importer. Specific to this discussion, I helped build a company that was solely focused on direct trade importing of Rwandan coffee and survived as a single origin coffee roaster. So for 6 years, I dreamed in Rwandan coffee, and so I can speak to this country pretty well. With us today, we also have Linda Mugaruka, who is a founding partner and agronomist with Mighty Peace Coffee, talking about Democratic Republic of Congo. With her is Jim Gokwe, who is also a partner in Mighty Peace, and he'll be translating for Linda. And then we have Jeanine Niyonzima-Aroian, founder and owner of J&P Coffee, talking about Burundi, and Jacob Elster, founding partner to Crop to Cup, and he'll be speaking more about Uganda, but I know that he's worked with many origins in the area, so you can speak to that as well. So please, Linda, if you'd start us off just by telling us a little bit about yourself and what you do with Mighty Peace.
C'est Linda Mugaruka, je suis congolaise d'origine. Je vis à Bukavu.
Just a brief introductory translation. So Linda started by saying, she's a mother, an agronomy engineer, and last year became a Q grader. She's been in the coffee space for 6 years and Mighty Peace Coffee for 4 years. And she's been working in coffee for that time frame. Yeah. And our chief quality officer, all quality questions, that Linda solves them. Every coffee we bring is because Linda said it was good and she trusted people who produced it. Yeah.
And Jeanine?
Sure, yes. My name is Jeanine Niyonzima-Aroian. I am the founder of J&P Coffee and also the founder of a nonprofit called Burundi Friends International based in California. I've been in coffee for about 10 years now. And I produce, we export and import coffee from East Africa, but specifically from Burundi. And our coffee are very well known for our work that we do with women farmers. We do everything from providing premium as a way to incentivize quality, to doing financial literacy program, to doing environmental projects in Burundi. And I'm also a part chair on a number of our windmills in Burundi. And I'm very great to be here. Thank you.
And Jake, who is going by Jacob today as a courtesy to me.
Good morning, good evening, everybody. I'm Jacob with Crop to Cup Coffee. We do marketing, sales, and distribution for a lot of the farmers and groups that people like Linda or Jeanine might work with. We're based out of New York, but we really focus on North America distribution. My job within the company is on the sourcing side. So my work happens between the harvests leading up to the harvest. So my job is to be a resource for producer partners and to help recruit new people who want to play the game of specialty.
Excellent. All right, now we have our players in place. So let's start talking coffee. First of all, again, there's so many differences between each of the countries, and I guess one of the first things is like, let's get down to the terroir. Could we each go around maybe in a round robin and talk about what are the elevation ranges and maybe the soil composition specific to the countries that you're working in?
Je peux.
Yeah.
Ici, chez nous, ça va, l'altitude, ça va entre 1200 à 2000.
So Linda gave a wide range. She said on the lowest end is 1,200 meters above sea level. On the high end is 2,000 meters. So we definitely a wide range there. And it's volcanic soil. We do have a few volcanoes in the region. One of them, unfortunately, actually erupted last year. But thankfully, the material and human casualties were not as bad as it could have been. In terms of the terroir, mentioned the volcanic soil and the varieties, mostly Bourbon, SL34, and a few of the hybrid. She mentioned there's some Catois as well as some Catamore. And the World Coffee Research Group is working with a few local engineers as well to basically further map some of the varietals that are available in Congo, because some of them, people just aren't familiar with. Some of them may be unique to Congo, but we'll know more as the research evolves. But that's kind of where it is. And in terms of the seasons, we have those two seasons, January through June and October through December, the latter being the fly crop.
Excellent. And how about in Burundi, Jeanine?
Yeah, so Burundi, also being very close to the Congo, actually, Bukavu is only 4 hours drive from Bujumbura. So I had a pleasure to actually visit the Congo area and Bukavu area just the last time that I was in Burundi. But anyway, in terms of like elevation, we have anything between 1,800 and 2,000 above sea level. That's mainly where our coffees are grown in Burundi, some of the best coffees. There are some areas where you can find things like, 1,500, but that's usually like lower altitude for coffee for us. Anything above 2,000 meters above sea level, usually that's for the tea cultivation in Burundi. Very similar to the Congo, also Burundi is a volcanic soil, which is you see those beautiful reddish soil. When you see some pictures from the coffee plantation in Burundi, that those are just past history of our soil being very volcanic. And is in terms of the varietal, Bourbon is predominantly what's being produced in Burundi for the last years since the 1970s. But we also have Robusta, which usually it's in the lower elevation close to the Lake Tanganyika, but not as much in Robusta as maybe that might be the case in the future with the demand. We have a number of varietals, what we call the subdivision of the main varietals. You find Jackson, you find Mibirizi, you find Kent, among others in Burundi. And it's just a stunning, beautiful country. So if you haven't visited Burundi, please let me know next time I have a trip to Burundi. I'll love to take you all.
Thanks. And Jacob?
Sign me up. I've heard Burundi is described as the Switzerland of East Africa. Uganda is a little bit different. It's certainly not as diverse as DRC, but it does have 3 major growing regions. And just to zoom out a little bit, I think it's useful to kind of picture where the Western Rift Valley spreads over this part of Africa. And you can see that there's highland plateaus that will have a little bit more flat growing areas, like you find in the northern part of Uganda, the West Nile or Rusi Paida area, depending on how you call it. This is bordering with the Turi, the area in DRC that generally speaking is not as steep slopes, not as volcanic. And it's really the only region that I think on this discussion that's outside of the tropical zone. Everything else is further south and more around the hard rain, long rain, short rain, equatorial seasons. And so that would be what we call Arusi. It's called White Nile more traditionally, but because of, or West Nile, but because of the connotations, we're trying to rebrand around the towns and zones, Zombo, Arusi, Paida. But this is a place that has traditionally non-volcanic soil. It's outside of the tropical zone. It's a little bit lacking in organic matter, which is a little ironic because it has too much shade cover. So part of the problem is there's too much organic mulch on the top layer. So it can lead to a little bit lacking of organic material underneath. but that's something that's being worked on. It's a porous border between the DRC and Uganda in this area. So the varietals go back and forth, a lot of what Linda already mentioned, but really a lot of Bourbon, Jackson, Kent, SL14, SL28. Further south on the border where, with the Kivu region in Congo, we have the Rwenzori area. This is much more steep volcanic soil as well. There you have really traditional SL14 and SL28s. In the far east part of the country on the border with Kenya, you have Mount Elgon, which is a specific Arabica growing region by itself. And that is also pretty much dedicated to SL14s and SL28s, although there are more Margot Heatbays and Catoras and some Typicas mixed in, especially as of late.
Wow, so a really good spread on the varietals. And with so having in Uganda like the flat growing region, does that leave an opportunity? Are people using mechanical harvesting, or is everything still select pick there or strip pick?
Everything is still home farm, so picked by hand. Yeah.
Okay.
There's, as I think people know, Uganda is a large producer of Robusta, just like Burundi and other places. Those are more lowland. If there were a place that were to get mechanical, I think that those would be the first ones to receive those investments. But so far, everything that I've seen in Uganda is picked by hand.
Excellent. And when it comes to processing, what's kind of the dominant processing method in Uganda right now? Are you doing wash, semi-wash, honeyed, natural, all the above?
Yeah. Okay. So in the Western region, Rwenzori, there's not much water. So the primary way of producing coffee is naturals. There are some exceptions to that, but generally speaking, it's naturals. And the way that that's traditionally been called is drugar, so dried Ugandan Arabica. However, the local term for that is chiboko, which has a different connotation if anybody in the region knows. But the point is it's not considered to be good coffee. So the work there is about floating these naturals and producing them in a way that's consistent with specialty, right? So separation and drying in a way that's consistent. It's very far removed from the mills and export infrastructure that you might find in Kampala, and it's separated by all Robusta. So it takes an extra effort to go ahead and separate this coffee and get it to market as a value add Arabica when all the intermediaries are Robustas, if you will. That's all real naturals. In the Mount Elgon area, traditionally things were home processed. So this was farmers hand pulping at home and then drying parchment and delivering that. Over the past decade, there's been a fluorescence of washing stations. So now it's actually interesting. Generally speaking, there's a pricing parity between parchment and cherry, 5-to-1, which is equal to the weight difference, meaning that you can sell 1 kilo of parchment, 5 kilos of parchment for the same as 1 kilo of cherry. However, the demand for cherry on Mount Elgon has exceeded that for parchment lately. And so that ratio is off. There's just many, many washing stations. So now the primary way of producing coffee in Mount Elgon is central process washing stations. And up in Irusi area, it's also washing stations as well. That will be separated into parchment of 3 different qualities. That is a traditional bell curve of quality 1, quality 2, quality 3, with 1/3 of volumes going to each of these categories. And so that parchment is collected. When the work we're doing there is to try to see if it's possible to introduce a 4th quality level, supreme quality. But so generally speaking, it's washing stations up there, although there's a lot of bulk parchment as well.
That's really interesting. And Jeanine, what's the main processing that's going on in Burundi right now?
Yeah, so in Burundi, which is a little bit different actually with the other 2 countries here that we have in terms of quality. So in Burundi, we've had wet meals that have been brought into the country since the 1970s. As you probably know, probably most people don't know, but Burundi stopped producing coffee since the early 1900s, and that was brought in by the colonies. But really the wet meals, and used the coffee, in the early 1900s, it was pretty much just sold as a commodity that goes into the Tanzania ports. And then the 1970s, the people who were in power back then just realized that they can actually be able to produce high quality coffee by bringing the processes that would help the farmers to really bring the quality of the coffee at the next level. In Burundi, like the other countries here that we have on the panel, the farmers are smallhold farmers. And then because they're smallhold farmers, they just pick coffees by hand. So, and then because of that, by default, you really have a very high potential of actually producing a very high quality coffee. If you're processing right. So if obviously it's grown right, and also it's picked right, which is one of the things that we do all the time before the harvest. Is just like to remind the farmers that you just have to pick the right cherries, the right, ripe cherries. So because of that, as I mentioned earlier, in most of the farmers in Burundi own anything between 25 to 50 trees on average. So, the quality is right there. So they carry them by head or bicycles and, bring them to the nearest windmills. So the windmills in Burundi, they are very much experienced compared to many others in the area. As a matter of fact, when Rwanda start, developing, they used to come to Burundi to learn in terms of how the process of the high quality coffees are done with windmills. As a matter of fact, we just had a group of people from DRC as well who were in Burundi last month to do the same, to kind of learn about how are you guys doing this? How have you been successful? So most of the windmills in Burundi really have the high knowledge of producing wet processed coffees. As a matter of fact, one of the biggest challenges that I have are people who want to buy low quality coffee from Burundi. So, but as I said, by default, because of the way we process coffee in Burundi, most of the coffee in Burundi are really high quality coffees, unless an accidental things happen, like coffee didn't get processed the same day, which is something that's very critical. When you bring the cherries or the windmill, they have to be processed that same day, that same night, actually, because usually get picked during the day, during the afternoon, and it gets the windmill, and then the nights they do the pulping. And then from that point, then the coffee goes into the tanks when it get fermented overnight. And then they clean it the next day and the process goes on. But in a short, the quality of wet processed coffee from Burundi is really high and even has a potential to be exceptional, which is one of the things that we work on very hard, myself being a curator, so I can be able to, facilitate in that end. We are striving to just, really go down above, the 87, 88, because it's very attainable. Another thing I didn't touch on earlier, we also have only one harvest in Burundi, which makes things just a little bit easier. So it goes from March to June, and that can just vary a little bit, based on Mother Nature. Sometimes it can go from February to July, like it was this year. We are still going through the dry milling right now as we are speaking. But we tend to just stick with one harvest, although there are some coffee that comes in the second harvest, but usually doesn't get picked because of the availability of the labor to do that. But in terms of also other processes that we have in Burundi, naturals are very well regarded and sought after in Burundi, then because of the quality of the cherries. So we also do natural process. We also do honey processes, but we are also very well known, as I said, for the wet processed coffee.
Excellent, very thorough. And Linda, what are the kind of prized processes going on in DRC?
Je vais commencer par la méthode comment est-ce qu'on sélectionne les cerises et tout. Donc, la récolte s'est faite d'une façon manuelle.
So she was saying that in terms of the process, first, sorry, it's handpicked, like is the case for Burundi, a lot of smallholder farmers. So a lot of the, actually in the harvest is handpicked, smallholders going there themselves. But the way it's done is a lot of education at first, so they know which cherries to pick. Because a lot of them, they were trained very informally, so they didn't go necessarily to school for that, the smallholders themselves. So they need agronomists to basically show them, remind them, and really repeat what are the right ways to pick the cherries, the right timing, what to look for. So that's part. In terms of the key processes, it's mostly fully washed. We do have some natural and honey. This few and far in between is mostly really based on request. And actually, one thing Linda did mention right now that we talked about a few weeks ago is that there's also somebody experimenting with geishas right now in Congo. So we are expecting to hopefully be able to bring the first Congolese geisha sometime next year. But yeah, so people are always learning, willing to experiment, and really trying to see, what the market wants and how Congo can fill that gap and meet that need. Donc, je vais traduire, merci.
Excellent, nice translating, Jim. Appreciate it.
Of course.
Yeah, I think this is really interesting to hear kind of how each region, each country is sort of developing their processing a little bit different. And I kind of want to bring it to now more about the flavor impact. So what would you guys say is kind of the main flavor profiles that you're working with? I guess we'll start with Jeanine first. In Burundi, what are kind of the main profiles of Burundian coffee?
Main flavor profiles, it depends on the terroir that you're speaking about. So I'm actually looking at some chit chat of some of my clients here, and I'm like, what are they talking here? Caramel, chocolate, milk chocolates, caramel, tofu, spice. So I think it all depends on the terroir. So, one of the beauty about the region where the coffee comes from in our region is because you have these microclimates and also micro terroirs, I call them. So, for example, for us, we have anything that goes from Kayanza to Ngozi to Karusi, which is like another actual new terroir in Burundi that's relatively, young in terms of like younger trees compared to a place like Kayanza, where really and even some of them going all the way to the Gitega region, where you can see really very diverse profile. As I want to say, like, the test profile or the descriptors of coffees that we get from those areas. Where some of them you might have, like in the Gozi area, you might have, lemon, you might have like the caramel, as I had mentioned, you might have like, tea-like, and then you go down south, down in the central part of Burundi, where you might have things like fuller body, complex chocolate taste. So you get a little bit of like, a wide range of, profiles, if I might say. But one thing that I have actually asked an expert, many years ago, and I say, what is Burundi coffee different from the other coffees in the region? And this gentleman told me, say, one thing I really like about Burundi coffee, they taste like a combination of what a Kenyan and Ethiopian coffee brings together, which for me really means, the floral parts and the sweetness part together. But in general, coffee from our area are really very well known for some great acidity. So, and that's one thing that you don't find like in places like, the Central America. So a lot of people that sought after, coffee from our area, they're looking for that just very unique acidity. Actually, we call them sparkling acidity. This is actually another term that was coined by somebody who started the Cup of Excellence in Burundi. So that's kind of what I can share now.
Very nice. Yeah, sounds delicious. And Linda, what is kind of the key profiles that we might find in DRC?
Déjà que la nature nous a déjà presque tout donné en RDC, je dirais que, bon, on a la chance parce que tout le café que j'ai dégusté, je vais dire, le café, en tout cas.
Definitely a very floral and fruity and high acidity. And that's in part because, some of our coffees come from elevation of 2,000 meters above sea level. So that really contributes to the high acidity. So we have the floral, fruity, and she also mentioned sometimes, citric or malic acid in terms of acidity types. And as well as brown sugar and tea-like are recurring, flavor notes you can definitely experience. And depending on which part of North or South Kivu, you can have some caramel and chocolate as well. And the one thing I will add, also in terms of comparisons, I know because, Congo is not as well known as some of the other, countries on Hispano in terms of coffee, but the people that don't really know Congo and taste it blindly, I've heard a lot of comparisons to more actually Latin American coffees, whether it was Colombia or Guatemala, even sometimes Costa Rica. So I think it's an example of kind of its versatility, that you can have, the more chocolate caramel notes or the fruitier high acidity notes. One client actually in California recently called it a fruit bomb. So I think it's definitely a very, very versatile coffee that brings different flavors. I'm smiling because I could tell, Linda's passion and patriotism in describing Congolese coffee.
Thanks for that, Jim. It does sound prettier in French, but I appreciate you putting it in English for us. And Jacob, how about the profiles that are kind of synonymous with Uganda?
Yeah, I can't follow that passion with anything but pragmatism. So I will start with Mount Elgon, because there's different ways to use these coffees. It's a dense bean. It's very similar to Bungoma, Chwele, Western Kenyan profiles, if people are familiar. But at a more developed roast, people oftentimes use this coffee for more medium plus roasts, not because of what it's lacking, but because of the complexity of sugar, the density of the bean, and the aromatics that you can get while still maintaining acidity. So I did a frequency search on some of our cupping notes. It's Snickers, Werther's, caramel, fig Newton, plum, raisin. However, at a lighter roast, especially at these higher altitudes on Mount Elgon, a lot of those are ridges, that sort of ridgeways where you have a valley, then a ridge, a valley, and a ridge. So you get quite a bit of variety. But on those ridge tops and on the steep slopes up there, it's a lot of tropical fruit that's possible. So dried pineapple, mango, passion fruit, lime are the key or the most frequent words that I was able to draw out of crop stir for those. So that's Mount Elgon. In Niyonzima-Aroian in the far west, again, this is where mostly naturals are made. So this is a good place to go for naturals. It's not quite the same naturals that you would get out of a Rwanda, which would be a fruit bomb, or out of Burundi even. It's a little bit more similar to a Mexican natural, if people have had those before, where it's fruit in the back, not fruit forward. Really, the most forward piece about it is the body. So it has a juicy or thick body. The fruit on the back is oftentimes, and according to my research, in our notes at least, a orange or strawberry wine. I also am seeing notes of marzipan, ginger, peanut brittle, lemon. So you can see some of those other sort of more unidimensional, but also adding up to a pretty complex cup. So it's a bit of a different natural than this fruit bomb that oftentimes people look for these, but it's incredibly palatable, flexible, great ingredient for iced or espressos. And the washed coffees that come out of the West, just to give a point of comparison, the notes that are most popular that we've seen there, and again, not all these coffees have been accepted, so this is just mining all of our crops here, right? But graham cracker, vanilla, milk chocolate, nougat, and orange. So that would be sort of what's underneath that fermentation for the naturals. And I'll end real quickly with Arusi, that northern region. We got started there many years ago, but one of the reasons was as a substitute for Sumatran coffees, because it is a lower acidity coffee, as known for its buttery body. It has that sort of sweet wood Sumatra sort of profile, malt, coca, lemongrass, dates, raisin. And these are the types of flavor profiles that we see out of there. So anyway, that's a quick.
Excellent. It's a good roundup. A lot of information in a short amount of time there. And, you know, what I hear in general is a lot of variety, you know, so whether it's variety within each country or between the three of them, there's a huge variety in terms of flavor profile, body, acidity, sweetness. And so that's really exciting because, you know, part of what we're kind of focused on here is blending coffee. So when it comes to blending, you know, what kind of role have you seen your coffees play? You know, is it more of a body and structure element, or is it, you know, kind of your acidity, or is it the sweetness, but maybe with some of that textured acidity as well coming in? You know, is it a nuance player or is it a base player? What have you seen, Jake?
Traditionally, Uganda has played the role of more of that bass player. It's been the supporting body and structure for blends. If we're talking about it in use of blends, I'd say that more recently, especially the work in Mount Elgon has made that exceptional. And there's absolutely, you know, single origins that come out of there, 85s, 86s all day long. We've seen some that have pushed the upper limits of that. So it's one of those neat coffees that has that flexibility of being both a bass player and then also a single origin feature. And before I pass on, just because no one's representing Tanzanian coffees on here real quick, it's interesting how different that is. I mean, Jem touched on it a bit with comparisons to sort of more of that Colombian mild profile, right? And you can find that in the DRC, but you also find that all over in northern Tanzania. So that's really known for me and my team, at least, around melons. So whether that's cantaloupe or honeydew, but sweet, clean coffees that can be used in a totally different way than any of these other coffees that we're talking about today. So I just wanted to include that diversity within the spread. And that's quite different than what you'll find in, you know, neighboring Southern Kenya or in Uganda. So it's quite unique.
Absolutely. Appreciate that. And Jeanine, what do you find is kind of the main part that a Burundi plays inside of a blend?
The sweetness and the acidity that the coffee can bring to their other coffee from a place like the Central America seem to be one thing that people actually look for when they're trying to bring the balance or the addition to our coffees, to other coffees around the world. You know, they're obviously, you know, our coffee are just amazing just as a single coffees in general, just single origin, but also they play a vital role when they need to kind of like bring the lift in other coffees from around the world. As I said, people seek for Burundi coffee to bring that acidity that might be lacking some coffees, to bring that sweetness that might be lacking some other coffee, and also a bit of complexity. So, and kind of like Jake also mentioned here, and also Jim, and as well as Linda, welcome back, is the beauty about the region, how so diverse it is. You know, it's almost, I kind of feel like sometimes you can go in that part of Africa and find anything that you want to bring forward into a coffee, even just like have, that you're missing to add on the coffees that you have from other region. But it very diverse, a lot of micro terroirs, as I had mentioned, which also bring the area to be quite of intriguing and special, and also very unique.
Excellent. Appreciate that. And Linda and Jim, what would you say about Congolese coffee? Have you seen it used in blends, and what kind of component of the blend is it playing?
Yeah, I'll jump into that one first, as I work a lot with a lot of the roasters using our coffee. So I'd say initially a lot of our people buying, roasters buying Congolese coffee from us, they started using it mostly as a single origin, because again, the coffee can stand really well on its own because of its, complex notes and things of that sort. But recently, I think a few of them, have tried to play around with it, and successfully. The results have been positive overwhelmingly. So, and again, I think I mentioned earlier, very versatile coffee. So whether it's, using it more so to bring that, that heavy body, that chocolate base, or if you want the fruitier notes, or whether it's, like part of like a 2 coffee blend, 3 coffee blend, there's probably a Congolese coffee that can fit there. So I'd say, some of our longest lasting clients using that espresso blend, use it for a couple of years. I think it really depends on, what they've done in the past and what their market kind of likes, and then kind of seeing, how Congo can basically fit that bill. Yeah, so it's been used very in diverse ways across the board as a blend. But yeah, whether it's, you want the fruitier Congolese coffee to accentuate the blend, or you want more the heavier and more chocolate caramel, those flavors are available in Congo, and we have different clients, using it for different purposes. And I'm trying to see if I can say, on the East Coast, they use it for that, on the West Coast like this, but I think it's really been a mix, geographically speaking, they like Congolese coffee as a blend components for different reasons. Yeah.
Excellent. So, I mean, it seems like there's a part to play for each of these countries in a blend. I know even, kind of in the past, a lot of Italian roasters will even use some Ugandan coffees and some of the Ugandan Robustas for their espresso blends. Working with Rwanda, there's a lot of variety within there as well. A lot of milk chocolate and some dark chocolate notes, red fruit, berries and cranberries and stuff like that. And occasionally you get some apple or some grape in there as well. But then again, they have some more earthy and Robusta coffees kind of on the eastern side as well. So like big variety, even just within the smaller country. But again, just a variety of positions that it can play in a different coffee as well. With some of with these coffees, kind of want to also look at what they're best for, whether it's for an espresso, a cold brew, filter, or pour over. I've had success with blending a variety of East African coffees for cold brew, it can be really interesting because cold brew is so inherently gives you this thick body, and it's always going to bring out sweetness and stuff like this. And, it's always getting knocked for not having acidity. But when you're using coffees like this, you still can pull out some of those fruit notes. And even for a lighter bodied, high elevation African coffee, you're bringing out body because of the brew method. So it ends up being a really interesting ingredient to use for something like that. And of course, we've seen a lot of espressos. What do you guys find? I guess first we'll start back with Jim and Linda. What do you find is kind of like one of the prized brew methods that people are blending with that you've seen success?
In terms of the brew method, I know personally, my personal use, I know in the summer, definitely cold brew. Definitely cold brew is a go-to for the summer, and we have a few partners using that right now. Our Congolese coffee for their cold brew. On a day-to-day basis, definitely more of a pour over person myself, and I think definitely helps bring out some of the unique flavors. Yeah. Linda, tu veux ajouter quelque chose?
Bon, déjà que la consommation locale du café n'est pas aussi
in terms of consumption locally in Congo, it's not very widely consumed. But those that do, there are a few coffee shops popping up here and there, and people are starting to consume more coffee locally, but it's not really part of the culture. But for those that do, French press definitely seems to be the go-to. There's definitely a lot of pride in kind of preparing a coffee using French press and being able to control the quantity and affecting the flavor depending on how you use your French press. That's what she uses, and what the people that she knows that goes to cafe kind of like how the coffee is served most often. But countrywide, it's hard to say because it's not necessarily part of the culture to drink coffee. Not yet. The culture always evolves, right?
Fair enough. And Jacob, what are you seeing with Uganda? What are kind of the blends that people have been using that coffee for?
Well, I think that in my personal limited experience, coffee from Uganda plays well with others in blends, just generally speaking. I think that the first comes to mind is really Mount Elgon varietals, because those really do play well. They don't have some of the more nuanced flavors that make it lost in a blend, for example. I mean, you can get there again, but it's something that's not going to be riding on that sort of floral aspects, is not going to be where it's hooked on. It really comes to the depth, the sugar complexity, the way that you're able to develop those sugars and maintain some acidity and the balance with body. as a novice roaster as well, going up into, wherever I'm now, they were relatively easy to roast and to keep consistent as well. So I found that they seem to be used quite a bit for filter blends. So if you have sort of, your broad base, you don't have control over the final point of distribution, then it's a really solid coffee because it has a wide window of being good from both a roasting point of view and from an extraction and from a freshness point of view, because of those complex sugars. And then if you move over to the West for rare and Zori coffees as naturals, for me, they were a little bit more difficult to blend, to roast, but they're also very easy to blend because they provide that body and sort of sweetness component that still provide a different type of base for those types of, mostly espresso, but you can also do it for filter drip or iced coffees. And then again, lastly, northern ones are just Sumatran subs in a sense. It's mostly there for that depth, that body, and you get the sweetness with the low acidity piece, which if you're painting a picture is a nice color to have in your palette, right? To be able to add that structure and body without extreme acidity.
Really interesting. So it seems like something good for espresso. And Jeanine, how about for the Burundi? Where do you see the most success? Like what kind of brew method is it suited for in a blend?
Here myself personally, actually, I do pour overs all year round. I hate to say that I actually drink Burundi coffee all year round. So I'm guilty for that. I've tried different things. I always try different things just to kind of, spice it out, but I always go back to the base, which is just, pour over. But one thing also our coffees are very well known to do very well is also on espresso. The people, that's what they call that sparkling acidity that you can actually get when you actually use for espresso purposes. So they do very, very well on espressos. Another thing also that I have seen people that do with our coffees are actually mixing the naturals and the fully wash, for that very specific purpose when it comes to, espresso consumption. And in terms of cold brew, actually this summer, that's another thing also that we have been also doing quite a bit with some of our clients. They're utilizing for cold brew and nitro as well, very, very successfully. So and then growing up for me, the aroma of the Burundi coffee, that's what used to wake me up in the morning. So I always remember my mom, now she cannot drink caffeinated coffee, but I always remember how they would just literally on the stovetop, they would just boil water and then put that coffee in there and the aroma would just fill the whole house and all wake up. So if you don't know about aromas from Burundi, you check it out.
I love those vivid sensory memories. That makes me want to go roast some coffee right now. So this is sounding great. I think we're starting to close in on time. So there's just a couple questions I wanted to get out before we turn it over to the audience. And one of them, of course, so what we've seen is, again, we have a wide variety of flavor profiles and different ways that we can work them into blends, whether it's an espresso, a cold brew, a filter coffee. There's different components that can work in each of those. One thing that kind of comes back all the time, and I just want to head it on straightforward because I'm sure everybody's been asked at some point, which is the potato taste defect. What do you say to roasters when they raise the issue of the potato taste? And is this something that they should be worried about, that it's going to ruin a coffee if they put it into a blend or something like that? Or is this something that can be mitigated? I guess I'll start with you first, Jeanine.
All right, so happy to answer that question, but I also to respond to John Moore. John is asking, can all you speak about the seasonality availability of the coffee per origin? Is North American-based roaster rotating coffees from hemispheres is part of maintaining freshness in green? And I'm going to respond to that potato defect question. So in terms of the coffees, most of our coffee tend to arrive for us because usually the harvest is from March to June. So you see our coffee starting to land toward the end of the year. So they are used as more toward the winter time, especially on the East Coast and the West Coast. You can actually find our coffee selling like in January, time frame. But all our coffee actually ship in Grand Pros. So one of the things that's blessing in disguise is the fact that our coffee have a very long, shelf life, as I might call. I even have some clients who are based in a different part of this continent who actually, would age the coffee because they actually tell me that after 2 years, the coffee even get better. So even regarding all the logistic complexity that we have been having lately, our coffee always landed, rested and just performed, exceptionally very well. But I think that's also from how we started involved, in the preparation of the coffees also, and how we also ship the coffee. So that's very critical. But you can really find our coffees now, all year round. In terms of freshness, as long as you're using the current crop, you can actually be able to get your freshness in green. So hopefully I addressed your question, John. And then in terms of the potato defect. So potato defect, that's something that you are going to find in the region in general. If it comes to Burundi, Congo, Rwanda, Uganda, that western part of our region, you are always going to find some potato defects. Now, the question is how you deal with it. So potato defect is just one bean. It's just one bean that's going to spoil everything. If you're a roaster, you're very lucky because actually when you roast, most of the time, for me, I can actually even smell like a bag of grain. I can tell that there's a potato defect in the bean that needs to come out. But if you roast the coffee, you're not going to miss it. And the key part of it, when you're bagging the coffee, is to try to actually see if you can find that batch that has that, bad, bean and throw it out. If you are in a cafe and actually preparing the coffee, the best thing to go about preventing to actually have that potato defect in the cup, once you smell it, just throw that away and then just, bring another batch to brew or prepare your coffee. So we do have some information we always provide to our clients in terms of like addressing them, but we also address them at the wet meal, which is the most critical part. Is it's all in the sorting, it's all in the flotation, it's all in the picking when the coffee is under shade, it's all in the picking when the coffee start being open to dry under the sun. It's that continuous picking. In our case, with triple pick our coffee at the dry mill before they go into the bag, into the gram per bag. So it's that extra detail that actually, if I want to say, the number of potato defect that we've been seeing is less and less because of that extra process that we bring forward into our coffee. But it's something that we don't have a solution for, but it's something that we have kind of figured out a way to address it in different ways.
Thank you for that. No, I think it's really important to understand what the risk is and if it's actually a big deal or not. And Jake, what do you say to people who are kind of bringing it up for your customers that have an issue with it?
Well, first, I wanted to just thank Jeanine for adding something that I hadn't thought about before, which is the barista can be that point of quality control. You can smell a potato defect when you open a bag. You don't even have to wait to grind it. You don't even have to wait to brew it. And if people were able to talk about it without such a stigma, then that would introduce one final piece of that Swiss cheese of quality control that we need to get rid of it. But yeah, I think that's lot separation, picking through, but being able to trace it back to the actual collection and lot so that can be part of a learning circle that goes back to interventions for the following year. That's something that Burundi and Rwanda are very good at. You will find some potato defect in the western part of Uganda in the Rwenzori range. And all the way up to that Arusi area, because it's the same mountain line and the same, I think that people think it's soil, although Linda would have to talk about this. And I also like to hear what Linda has to say about it. It seems to be less and less over the last 10 to 15 years. And I'm not sure if it's purely because of the quality controls that we talked about, or if it's because of the rejuvenation of coffee trees or overall efforts. But it does seem to be something that I hear less and less of. But the stigma is still preventing a lot of customers from using coffees from this region, especially as larger, more staple parts of their menu. So they may be comfortable having a small in and out couple bag featurette of a Burundi or Rwanda or Rwenzori coffee. But I do believe that it has reached the level where it's something that you can consider reliably deploying coffees from this region without worry about your wholesale customers or people outside of your site pulling a potato defect. Or if they do, being able to talk about it in a way like Jeanine pointed out, being like, great, toss it out, and then go on to the next. So that would be consistent with how we talk about it as well.
I agree with you. It's gotten to the point and working with, again, just Rwanda as the only ingredient that we used. We had a full line of espresso blends, filter coffee blends, and specifically pour over blends that basically it was going to come up at some point, right? So there was definitely going to be a potato at some point. And the fact is that it came up way less than I ever imagined. We had so few complaints about it that I was really impressed by it. And the other thing to note is like Jeanine was alluding to, that it's one bean can kill like a cup, if you're cupping. But if you brew a batch, the proportionality plays a big role in whether or not you detect it. So if you're doing a batch brew of coffee, or if you're doing cold brew and you have 1 or 2 potatoes in there, it's not actually going to ruin the entire batch of coffee. And so I think that's also a big thing to consider and to like maybe give less worry to. But Linda, what do you find in Congo, and how prevalent is it, and what have you heard back, and what do you talk to customers about when you get complaints?
Le goût ou les défauts de patates, c'est une question sur laquelle je pense qu'on n'a pas encore trouvé de réponse de façon générale. Mais ce que je pense, c'est que les défauts de patates.
Yeah, she was saying basically in general, potato defect is definitely the worst possible kind of defect you can have in Congolese coffee, and I guess coffee from the region as well. So it's definitely something her and the team are working hard to minimize. She did, kind of echo Jeanine's word that, to say we will eliminate it fully as of now, we can't say that, we can't say that yet. It's inevitable that unfortunately sometimes some will slip by, but there is a lot of work being done to minimize that and reduce the instances in which we come across potato defect, whether it's at the farm level, just more education, and also like Jeanine was saying, a lot of extra sorting across the board. So always extra sorting. And one other thing, there's also more cupping, because I know one thing Linda mentioned is basically going through a 5-day process of cupping, because in the past, one way in which sometimes you'll cup it one day, and then unless you cup it the next day, you probably won't realize it's potato defect. But the first day you won't get that smell or that taste, but you will get a couple days later. So one protocol in the install actually earlier this year was to basically every lot she approves, like the final step, after all the extra sorting, is to also do a 5 days of cupping the same coffee, and just to make sure, just kind of eliminate as much as possible to reduce any instances there. And she does catch it once in a while, but but that's like kind of like the final step of what we can do. And one thing we're also looking into, which Linda mentioned, was using a UV tunnel to be able to that's the research is not conclusive on that yet. So we are still doing our own research to verify that, but there is some data that shows that you can use basically UV rays to identify, the gas that's emitted from, the bug that causes potato defect. You can actually see it through that. So we have not verified that yet, but it's something we're looking into. We may invest in if more data shows that it's a way to combat it, because again, it's something that I think all of our hearts drop if somebody's like potato defect, because we know it's a big stigma. It's a big stigma out there that we try to combat. And but like Jeanine said, it's normally it's just like one. So if you toss it out, like the next batch should be fine. But I think because of how unpleasant the smell is, it does scare some people. And some people may love our coffee, but if you have told me directly, love this coffee, I'll use it as single origin. But I'm not quite ready to use it as a part of this blend, because I don't use any East African coffees in that blend. So basically, he excluded all of us from his blend because of his fear of potato defect. So the goal really is to, that particular person to, basically continue to talk and educate, so that they don't just say, Congo, around the Burundi, no blend component for them because of potato defect. Because again, it's few and far in between, and also it's not as prominent as it once was. So I think education to kind of remove the stigma and get people to not exclude coffee from the Great Lakes because of that stigma.
Absolutely. No, I echo that sentiment. It was always like the number one thing that we kind of had to talk to people about and get them to understand. There's many defects in the world. I remember working specifically with like Italian roasters, and from Brazil, sometimes you get the stinker bean, and the stinker was just like that was like the one thing that they couldn't find, and it would come in and it would just again destroy like an entire cup. But it was something that they were willing to live with, because it was still a good coffee and it was still ticking all the boxes that they needed. So it's really just about kind of adapting and understanding more about the defect, how to identify it, how to work with it, and understanding that it's not going to just destroy everything if you get 1 or 2 in a whole sack of coffee, right? So I think education is always a big part of everything. So that's the real thing. Anyway, so we're about at time. I did put out if anybody had questions in the chat, but I just want to give everybody another opportunity. If you had a question specifically and you don't know where the chat is and you wanted to just chime in verbally, feel free to unmute yourself and ask a question, and we'd be happy to field that. Otherwise, we're getting ready to wrap it up. I see some laughter going on. Jake's making some great jokes in the chat.
And if I could add one more thing until a question or comment pops up, is also to respond to John Moore's question earlier. Because Congo has those dual harvests, we basically have fresh coffee every month of the year, except basically from May through August. But we were able to have fresh coffee almost year round because of that. So if you're looking for freshness, and you want a coffee, but you want you want a coffee, but you want the freshest available, we'll probably always have that, except between May and August. Yeah.
Excellent.
Maybe just as a high level, is it true in your experience, Jeanine, Jem, Linda, the harvest in this area seems to move generally from the south to the north, meaning that you'll get southern Tanzania before northern Tanzania, Burundi before Rwanda, and then up through Uganda. And if you want to look at that as just sort of a general guideline for how to dimensionalize this part of East Africa, please correct me, panelists, that may be useful. And they all kind of result in end of Q4 or early Q1 arrivals from a point of view, but it would go from a freshness perspective from south to north. Is that consistent with your experiences?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, we also get a lot in Q3. So we got, our first lots from this year's harvest arrived in late August. So we do get, Q3, Q4, and Q1, basically everything except Q2.
Yeah.
Except late Q2, really, yeah.
Excellent point for planning and, kind of when you want things to arrive and planning for your blends as well. So you understand when you're going to have your fresh coffees available. So, I think in summation, what we've seen here, and there's only so much we can pack into 1 hour, is that there's a tremendous amount of variety within these 5 countries, and that they can tick different boxes for different blends, whether you're going for a cold brew, a filter coffee, an espresso, or if you just want to enjoy it on its own as a pour over as well. Blending with these coffees, and like I was saying as well, I think we always think about blending with different countries, but you can also do single origin blends. We did this with Rwanda, and if you are doing a pour over and you want something more dimensional, but even from the same country, you can easily blend within that country and mix different lots to get a solid coffee that's still a single origin. And so I think that's something that a lot of people don't consider as much anymore. You want to keep it to your single lot or something, but you can still blend within a country. So there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of variety to work with, and a lot of beautiful coffees to explore in East Africa. So I appreciate, first, I want to say thank you to all our panelists. You guys have been great and super open and really intelligent with your answers. And thank you to everybody for joining us and listening and bearing through Jim's sort of recital of French. No, he did a great job. I'm just kidding. And listening to Jacob's dad jokes in the chat. This has been a great adventure. So, and if anybody is interested in any of these coffees or contacting these companies, people can drop it in the chat, or feel free to contact me directly. You have my contact, and I'll make sure to put you in touch with the companies that are interested. So definitely feel free to reach out if you're looking to get coffee from one of these companies. Again, we have Crop to Cup, JNP Coffee, and Mighty Peace Coffee are the main companies being represented here today. And I just want to say thank you to everybody. And we'll see you again soon. If you missed it or you want to take notes, this is going to be broadcast on coffeenet.tv. That's coffeenet.tv. So we'll be playing the video so you can check it out. I hope nobody got a wrist cramp trying to take notes, but you'll be able to see it again on playback. So thank you again, everybody, and take care.
Thank you, Jake. Take care, everyone.
Merci.
Au revoir. Merci tous. Thanks, everyone. Thank you again.
Au revoir.